The Silence proto-captain, Alina Vasquez, stood on the bridge of the research vessel Prometheus Dawn, watching the ancient ruins through the main view screen. The dead planet below them held mysteries that had drawn human explorers across 3 solar systems. These weren't just any ruins. The energy readings coming from the structures defied everything humanity knew about physics. Dr. James Chen moved between his quantum analysis stations, his eyes bright with excitement. The physicist had spent his entire career studying impossible phenomena, but nothing had prepared him for what they'd discovered. The alien structures seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Commander Zara al-Rashid checked the tactical displays for the 100th time. As the ship's military strategist, she trusted science, but she trusted her instincts more. Something about this place felt wrong. The silence was too complete. No electromagnetic radiation, no quantum fluctuations, nothing. It was as if the planet existed in a bubble of absolute emptiness. Engineer Marcus Thompson worked at his console, trying to make sense of the readings his instruments were giving him. According to every sensor on the ship, the ruins should not be able to exist. The materials were impossible combinations of elements that shouldn't be stable. Yet there they were, standing after millions of years, waiting. Medical officer Dr. Queso Tanaka monitored the crew's biological signs from her station. Everyone showed elevated stress levels, but that was normal during first contact situations. What worried her was the strange resonance she was detecting in their brain patterns. Something about the planet was affecting human neural activity in ways she had never seen. The exploration had begun 3 days ago when long-range sensors detected the anomalous structures. The Prometheus Dawn was humanity's most advanced research vessel, designed to investigate phenomena that standard ships couldn't approach safely. Its crew represented the best minds from Earth's colonies, brought together to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Alina had led exploration missions for 15 years, but this felt different. The structures weren't just ancient, they were waiting. Every scan they performed seemed to trigger new activity in the ruins. Lights that hadn't shone for eons began to flicker. Systems that had been dead for millennia started to hum with power. James completed another quantum resonance scan and frowned at the results. The structures were responding to human presence, but not in any way his equipment could analyze. It was as if the ruins were trying to communicate, but in a language that existed beyond normal space and time. The first sign of trouble came from Zara's tactical station. Energy signatures were approaching from the edge of the system. Big ones, the kind that belonged to warships, not exploration vessels. She counted 15 contacts, moving in perfect formation toward their position. Alina felt her stomach drop. As the alien fleet came into visual range, the ships were beautiful and terrible, made from what looked like crystallized darkness. They moved without visible propulsion, bending space around them like living things. These weren't explorers. These were predators. The communication came without warning, transmitted directly into the minds of every human on the ship. The voice was cold and vast, carrying the weight of ancient authority. It spoke in perfect English, though Alina knew. Somehow, that language was irrelevant to these beings. The voice identified itself as High Commander Vex High of the Vorth Empire. It explained that humans had trespassed in sacred space, touching things that were not meant for lesser species. The ruins belonged to the Vorth's creators, beings so advanced that even the mighty Vorth Empire served only as caretakers of their legacy. Alina tried to respond, to explain that they were peaceful researchers. But the alien commander cut her off with something that felt like mental pressure. The Vorth had observed humanity's expansion across the galaxy. They had watched human colonies grow and human technology advance. They had decided that humanity was a contamination that needed to be contained. Marcus worked frantically at his station as the alien ships surrounded the Prometheus Dawn. Their weapons weren't like anything in human databases. Instead of energy beams or missiles, the Vorth ships projected fields of absolute nothingness. Where the fields touched matter, things didn't explode or burn. They simply stopped existing. But the Vorth had something worse than destruction in mind for the human crew. High Commander Vex-High explained that death was too simple for a species that dared to touch the sacred ruins. Humans would experience the Silence Protocol, a fate reserved for civilizations that overreached their proper place in the cosmic order. Keiko's medical senses went insane as the alien weapon activated. It wasn't targeting the ship's hull or systems, it was targeting consciousness itself. Every human on board suddenly found themselves trapped inside their own minds, unable to communicate with anyone else. They could see and hear, but they could not speak or touch or share their thoughts. Alina tried to give orders, but no sound came from her mouth. She tried to move toward her crew, but her body wouldn't respond to her commands. She was a prisoner in her own skull, watching helplessly as her ship drifted dead in space. The Vorth weapon hadn't killed them. It had done something far worse. It had made them alone. James felt the isolation like a physical weight pressing down on his consciousness. His brilliant mind, used to processing complex quantum interactions, suddenly had nothing to work with except his own thoughts. He could see his equations on the screens around him, but he couldn't input new data or share his discoveries. Knowledge without connection was just organized loneliness. Zara experienced the silence as a tactical nightmare. She could observe the enemy fleet, analyze their positions and probable strategies, but she couldn't warn anyone or coordinate a response. A military commander without the ability to command was just a person with theories and no way to test them. Marcus found himself staring at his engineering displays, understanding exactly what was happening to the ship's systems, but unable to make any repairs or modifications. His hands wouldn't obey his mind's commands. His voice wouldn't carry his warnings. He was a master of technology, rendered powerless by his own isolation. Keiko watched her crew's vital signs fluctuate wildly as their minds struggled against the alien-imposed separation. She knew what treatments might help, what medications could ease their psychological stress, but she couldn't reach her equipment or communicate her findings. She was a healer who couldn't heal. High Commander Vex-High's voice penetrated their isolation, explaining the true purpose of the Silence Protocol. It wasn't just punishment, it was education. Humans would learn what happened to species that believed. They could transcend their natural limitations. They would experience the futility of individual consciousness when separated from the collective strength that lesser beings mistook for power. The Vorth had used this weapon on dozens of species throughout their empire's expansion. Civilizations that had dared to reach beyond their designated roles were left to drift in space, their crews trapped in perfect isolation until madness or despair consumed them. It was considered a merciful fate compared to complete extinction, but the Vorth commander had made a critical error in understanding human nature. Isolation didn't break human spirits, it focused them. When humans couldn't connect with others, they found ways to connect with themselves. When they couldn't share their thoughts, they deepened their personal understanding. When they couldn't touch the external world, they explored their internal universe. Alina began to notice something strange happening in her mind. The silence that was supposed to drive her insane was instead creating a kind of clarity she had never experienced. Without the constant input of external communication, her consciousness started to expand inward, discovering layers of awareness she hadn't known existed. James found that his quantum theories began to make sense in new ways when he could only think about them instead of trying to explain them to others. The mathematics of multiple dimensions started to feel natural, as if his mind was learning to exist in the same impossible spaces that the ancient ruins occupied. Zara discovered that tactical thinking became more precise when she couldn't rely on external confirmation. Her strategic mind started to process scenarios at speeds that surprised her, developing battle plans that existed purely in the realm of possibility until they could be tested. Marcus realized that his understanding of technology was becoming more intuitive when he couldn't physically manipulate it. He began to perceive the ship's systems as extensions of consciousness rather than mere mechanical devices. The boundary between mind and machine started to blur in ways that felt both terrifying and wonderful. Kaysa found that her medical knowledge was expanding beyond the purely biological. She started to understand the connection between consciousness and physical reality, seeing patterns that linked mental states to quantum fluctuations in ways that traditional medicine had never explored. The 5 humans began to experience something that the Vorth Empire had never encountered in all their centuries of using the silence protocol. Instead of breaking down under isolation, they were building up. Their individual consciousnesses weren't fragmenting, they were crystallizing, becoming more focused and powerful with each passing hour. High Commander Vex High noticed the unusual readings from the human ship and increased the power of the silence protocol. Other species had taken days or weeks to succumb to madness. These humans had been isolated for 18 hours, and their mental patterns were becoming stronger, not weaker. The ancient ruins on the planet below began to respond to the changes in human consciousness. Lights that had been dim started to shine brighter. Systems that had been dormant for millions of years began to activate. The Vorth commander realized with growing alarm that the humans weren't just resisting the silence protocol, they were transforming because of it. Alina felt the change beginning in her deepest thoughts. The isolation that was meant to imprison her mind was instead teaching it to exist in new ways. She was still herself, still completely human, but she was becoming something more. Her consciousness was learning to bridge the gap between individual awareness and universal connection. The Vorth had given humanity exactly what it needed to transcend its current limitations. In trying to silence human voices, they had taught human minds to sing in harmonies they had never imagined possible. The real awakening was about to begin. The unity awakening. The transformation began in the space between thoughts, in the quantum foam where consciousness touched reality. Alina felt it first as a whisper in her mind that wasn't her own voice, but wasn't alien either. It was familiar in a way that made her heart race with recognition. It was James, somehow reaching across the impossible barrier of the silence protocol. The physicist had discovered something extraordinary in his enforced isolation. While his body remained paralyzed and his voice silenced, his mind had learned to exist partially outside normal space-time. The same quantum principles that governed the ancient ruins were governing human consciousness. They weren't separate from the universe around them. They were expressions of it. James found that he could project his thoughts into the quantum field that surrounded their ship, not as communication in any traditional sense, but as pure intention given form. He reached out through dimensions that the Vorth couldn't perceive, touching the consciousness of his crewmates with mathematical precision. Alina felt the connection establish itself like a doorway opening in her mind. Suddenly, she could sense James's presence, not as words or images, but as pure understanding. She knew his thoughts about the quantum nature of consciousness, felt his excitement at discovering how isolation had actually freed their minds from the limitations of normal communication. Zara experienced the connection as a tactical revelation. Instead of being cut off from her team, she was now linked to them in ways that made traditional communication seem primitive. She could feel Elena's leadership instincts, James's analytical brilliance, and the growing presence of Marcus and Keiko as they joined the expanding network of consciousness. Marcus felt the ship's systems, responding to his thoughts in ways that defied everything he knew about engineering. The boundary between his mind and the vessel's computer networks was dissolving. But instead of losing himself in the machine, he was bringing the machine to life. The Prometheus dawn was becoming an extension of human consciousness, guided by intention rather than mere programming. Keiko watched in amazement as her medical sensors registered impossible changes in the crew's brain activity. Their neural patterns were synchronizing across quantum distances, creating a collective intelligence that maintained individual identity while sharing knowledge instantaneously. They were becoming something new without losing anything that made them human. High Commander Vexhai observed the readings from the human ship with growing unease. The silence protocol was designed to prevent exactly this kind of development. Species weren't supposed to evolve under isolation. They were supposed to break down, to accept their limitations and submit to Vorth authority. These humans were doing the opposite. The ancient ruins on the planet below were now blazing with light that hadn't been seen for millions of years. The structures were responding to human consciousness in ways that suggested they had been waiting for exactly this kind of contact. Whatever species had built them had possessed the same ability to transcend individual limitations. While maintaining personal identity, Alina realized that the ruins weren't just ancient technology. They were a test left behind by beings who had once faced the same choice that humanity now confronted. They could remain isolated and limited, or they could learn to connect their consciousness without losing their individuality. The builders of the ruins had chosen transcendence, and now they were offering the same choice to humanity. The connected human minds began to understand the true nature of the Vorth Empire's power. The aliens weren't naturally superior to other species. They had simply learnt to use technologies created by more advanced civilizations. They were caretakers, not creators, maintaining systems they didn't fully understand and using weapons they couldn't improve upon. James felt the ship's quantum drives responding to his thoughts, but not in any way that standard physics could explain. The engines weren't just moving the vessel through space, they were moving it through the fabric of reality itself, sliding between dimensions like the ancient ruins existed in multiple states. Simultaneously, Zara perceived the Vorth fleet's battle formations with crystal clarity, understanding their tactics not through observation but through direct comprehension of their strategic intentions. The aliens fought according to rigid patterns, expecting their enemies to remain trapped in conventional thinking. They had no defense against opponents who could anticipate their moves through shared consciousness. Marcus discovered that he could interface with alien technology as easily as human systems. The principles underlying Vorth weapons and shields were based on the same quantum foundations that governed all matter and energy, with the enhanced understanding provided by the connected human minds. He could see how to turn their own weapons against them. Keiko found that she could monitor not just human biological functions, but the life signs of the Vorth themselves. The aliens weren't as different from humans as they pretended. They had the same capacity for consciousness expansion, but they had chosen hierarchy and control over unity and growth. They were afraid of transcendence because it would mean giving up their position as rulers of lesser species. The moment of breakthrough came when all 5 human consciousnesses aligned perfectly, creating a resonance that shattered the silence protocol completely. Alina could suddenly speak again, but her voice carried harmonics that hadn't existed before. When she spoke for all of them, individual and collective simultaneously. The Prometheus dawn began to change, its hull flowing like liquid metal as it reformed itself according to new principles of design. The ship was becoming something that existed partially outside normal space, able to phase in and out of dimensions at will. It was no longer just a vessel carrying humans. It was humanity given form, consciousness expressed as matter and energy. High Commander Vex-High tried to fire the silence protocol again, but the weapon couldn't lock onto targets that existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The humans had learned to be present and absent at the same time, individual and collective, limited and transcendent. They had evolved beyond the reach of Vorth control. The alien commander ordered his fleet to attack with conventional weapons, but the projectiles and energy beams passed harmlessly through the transformed human ship. Elena's voice reached across space, speaking directly to the minds of every Vorth in the fleet, offering them the same choice that humanity had been given. The humans didn't threaten destruction or conquest. Instead, they shared their discovery of how consciousness could expand without losing identity, how individuals could connect without surrendering autonomy. They offered the Vorth Empire the chance to evolve beyond the need for domination and control. Some of the alien ships began to respond, their crews curious about the transformation they were witnessing, but Vex-High ordered them to maintain formation, warning that the humans were trying to contaminate their minds with dangerous ideas about transcendence. The Vorth Empire had maintained order for millennia by keeping species separate and limited. Unity was chaos, growth was rebellion. Alina felt sadness for the aliens who chose to remain trapped in their hierarchical thinking, but she also felt hope for those who were beginning to question their empire's teachings. The transformation that humanity had undergone wasn't limited to one species. Any consciousness could learn to transcend its apparent limitations, while maintaining its essential nature. James began broadcasting the quantum equations that described consciousness expansion, transmitting them not just to other human ships, but to any species capable of receiving them. The knowledge couldn't be forced on anyone, but it could be offered freely to those ready to accept the responsibility of transcendence. Zara realized that the ancient ruins contained similar broadcast systems designed to share the secrets of consciousness evolution with any species that proved capable of understanding them. Humanity had passed the test not by conquering the aliens, but by offering them partnership in growth. Marcus felt the ship's new capabilities, stabilizing as its transformation completed. The Prometheus dawn could now exist in any dimension, travel at speeds that made conventional physics irrelevant, and interface with any technology based on quantum principles. But more importantly, it remained recognizably human in its purpose and values. Queso monitored the life signs of crews throughout the galaxy. As human ships began to undergo similar transformations, each vessel's evolution was unique, reflecting the personalities and needs of its crew, but all maintained the essential human commitment to growth, exploration, and connection with others. The Fourth Fleet finally retreated, unable to comprehend opponents who offered evolution instead of demanding surrender. High Commander Vexai transmitted a final warning that the Empire would return with greater force. But Alina knew that force was no longer relevant. You couldn't fight transcendence with weapons. You could only choose to join it or remain limited by fear. As the Prometheus Dawn prepared to continue its mission of exploration and discovery, Alina looked out at the stars with new eyes. Humanity had learned that consciousness was not trapped inside individual bodies or limited to single species. It was a universal principle, capable of infinite expansion and connection while maintaining the diversity that made existence beautiful. The ancient ruins continued to shine with welcoming light, no longer mysterious but familiar, as if humanity had finally come home to a truth it had always carried within itself. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now humans had the ability to experience all of it. While remaining true to their essential nature, they had been crippled by alien weapons, isolated by advanced technology, and faced with the choice between submission and extinction. Instead, they had discovered that their greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their ability to remain connected to each other and to the universe itself. They had unleashed something beyond human while becoming more human than ever before. The awakening had begun, and it would spread to every corner of the galaxy, one consciousness at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of transcendence at a time. Humanity had found its true purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or servants, but as gardeners of consciousness itself, helping every willing species discover what it meant to be truly alive. Asterisk.